want to start with a number, not a theory, not a philosophy. A number, 67. That's the average retirement age in America. And the Federal Reserve tells us that the median retirement savings for households between 55 and 64 is approximately $134,000. $134,000 for a retirement that could last 30 years. Now let me tell you who I am, because what I'm about to say only means something if you know where it's coming from. My name is Dr. Richard Ashford. I spent 35 years as a retirement planning economist. I held a research chair at a respected institution. I published papers on pension sustainability that were cited in policy hearings. I lectured to rooms full of professionals who came specifically to learn what I knew. And over the course of my career, I personally advised more than 2,000 individuals and families on how to build, protect, and sustain their retirements. And here's the thing most experts won't say. My own retirement works. I retired at 65. My income is diversified. My health care is structured. I sleep at night. Not because I was lucky, because I followed rules that I'm about to share with you. But here's what actually keeps me up at night. For every client I saved, I watched 3 others walk out of my office, smile, shake my hand, and do the exact opposite of what I told them. I watched them believe things that weren't true. I watched the myths take hold. And I watched what happened to them years later when reality caught up. There is a pattern, not a theory. A documented, repeating, devastating pattern that separates the people who retire with genuine financial freedom from the people who spend their final decades in quiet desperation. I've seen it across 35 years in more than 2,000 cases. I'm going to tell you exactly what that pattern is, right now, because if you're watching this, you still have time to do something about it. And I don't want your face in my archive. Look, most people spend their entire careers believing that the secret to a comfortable retirement is a big enough number in a savings account. Chase the number, hit the number, cross the finish line. And they're not entirely wrong. But they're only seeing half the game. Here's the thing I've told hundreds of clients and still tell people today. I have seen people retire with $2.3 million and run out of money at 78. And I've seen people retire with $420,000 and die financially stable at 91. Same country, same era, same Social Security rules, completely different outcomes. Why? Because the number is not the secret. The structure is the secret. The people who retire wealthy, not just rich on paper, but genuinely, sustainably secure, they built a specific kind of architecture around their money. Multiple income streams, a tax strategy that didn't just account for today, but for the tax environment 15 years from now. A healthcare buffer that didn't rely entirely on Medicare alone. And a plan for the one risk most people never anticipate until it's too late. The sequence of when their returns arrive. The people who retire broke or nearly broke almost universally did the same thing. They had one plan, one pile of money, and zero structural flexibility when that plan encountered reality. I've been keeping a mental notebook for 35 years. Every client who came to me in crisis, I asked myself the same question. What was the first domino? What was the single structural failure that set everything else in motion? And I'll tell you what I found. Almost every time. It wasn't the 2008 crash. It wasn't the 2020 pandemic. Those were accelerants. The first domino was always one of 4 beliefs, 4 myths, that the client had carried for decades, unchallenged. And the myth they believed told me everything I needed to know about how their story would end. But before I get to those, let me tell you about a man I'll call Robert. Robert walked into my office in 2009. He was 63 years old. He had $1.1 million in a traditional 401k. He had a pension from his employer of $3,400 a month, and Social Security coming at 66 that would add another $2,100 a month. On paper, Robert looked like the success story. He had done everything he was told. He came to me relaxed, smiling, looking for confirmation. He said, "Dr. Ashford, I just need you to tell me I'm doing the right thing." I looked at his complete financial picture, and I felt something I'd felt dozens of times before. That specific quiet dread of seeing a man standing on thin ice and not knowing it. I asked him one question. "Robert, how much of your $1.1 million is in a Roth?" He looked at me and said, "None. My advisor always said tax deferred was better while I was working." I didn't show him my face in that moment. I've learned not to. But internally, I knew exactly what we were dealing with. Robert was a retired engineer from Ohio. Meticulous, methodical, disciplined. He had maxed his 401k contributions for 27 consecutive years without missing one. Not one. He had never borrowed against it, never touched it for emergencies. He had been a textbook accumulator, and he knew it. He wore that discipline like a badge of honor because it was one. And that, precisely, was the problem. Here is what most people genuinely do not understand. And I mean intelligent, accomplished people who have made responsible financial decisions their entire lives. Every dollar in a traditional 401k is a promise you made to the federal government to pay income taxes on it later. Every single dollar. You deferred the tax during your earning years. Now you're in the distribution phase. And later is now. Robert walks into retirement with $1.1 million, but what he actually has is $1.1 million in a tax-deferred account that will generate taxable income every time he touches it. And even if he doesn't touch it, at age 73, the IRS sends him a bill anyway. Required minimum distributions. He doesn't get to choose. The government calculates what he must withdraw each year based on his account balance and his life expectancy, and he pays ordinary income tax on every dollar. At 73, Robert's RMDs were pushing $68,000 a year. Add his $3,400 monthly pension, add his Social Security. His total annual income on paper was approximately $112,000. Which placed him in a tax bracket that felt, as he told me on the phone in 2019, like being punished for having saved. And then Medicare entered the picture. Because of his income level, Robert was subject to IRMA surcharges, income-related monthly adjustment amounts, the program that Medicare uses to charge higher-earning retirees significantly more for their Part B and Part D coverage. Robert was paying nearly twice what his neighbor paid for Medicare, not because he was sicker, because on paper he looked wealthy enough to pay more. He called me in the fall of 2017. His wife, Carol, had just been diagnosed with a condition requiring sustained, specialized care. Not catastrophic in the immediate sense, but the kind of slow, steady drain on resources that reshapes everything. He said, "Rich, I did everything right. How is it possible that I'm feeling this squeezed?" I told him the truth. "Robert, you did almost everything right, but you optimized for accumulation and never planned for distribution. And those are two completely different games." There was a long silence on the phone, and then he said, "Nobody told me there were two games." That moment, that exact sentence. I have heard versions of it at least 300 times in my career. 300 people who accumulated responsibly, worked hard, stayed disciplined, and walked into the distribution phase completely blind to the rules of the game they were now playing, because nobody told them the game had changed. Now let me tell you about Dennis. Dennis retired in October of 2007. He was 62 years old. He had $890,000 in a traditional IRA, no Roth, no pension, Social Security at 66. His plan was straightforward. He would withdraw what he needed each month from the IRA, live modestly, and let the rest continue to grow. 4 months after Dennis retired, the S&P 500 began its descent into the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. By March of 2009, the market had dropped 55%. Dennis didn't panic and sell everything. I want to be clear about that. He stayed invested, But he had to eat. He had to pay his mortgage. He had utilities, insurance, a car payment. Every month for 2 years, Dennis withdrew from a portfolio that was simultaneously declining. He sold shares at 40 cents, at 35 cents, at 28 cents. Shares that, if he'd had another income source to draw from, he could have left alone to recover. By 2010, Dennis had depleted roughly 41% of his portfolio. Not because of bad investments, because of sequence. Because he was forced to withdraw from a falling account at the exact worst time, and the mathematics of that sequence, the permanent compounding damage of selling low and never getting those shares back, changed the entire trajectory of his retirement. Dennis had to return to work at 64 years old, part-time but still. He'd told his wife they were done with all of that. He'd made promises. He'd had plans. And I sat with him in my office in 2011, looking at the numbers, and I remember exactly what he looked like. A man measuring the distance between where he thought he'd be and where he actually was. I've never forgotten that look. This is what I need you to hear. The structural risks I've described: tax concentration, sequence of returns exposure, healthcare cost underestimation. They are not theoretical risks for someone else. They are the documented causes behind the majority of retirement failures I have personally witnessed. Not market crashes, not bad luck, structure, or the absence of it. So here is what I tell every person who sits across from me today. The same things I've refined over 35 years of watching what actually works and what doesn't. First, understand your tax exposure right now. Pull out every retirement account you have and ask one honest question. How much of this money has never been taxed? Because that money is not fully yours yet. It is a deferred tax liability, and the window for doing Roth conversions before your RMDs force your hand is finite. It closes at 73. Map your conversion strategy with a tax professional before you reach that wall. Second, build the 3-bucket tax structure deliberately. Tax-deferred accounts like traditional 401ks and IRAs. Tax-free accounts like Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks. And taxable brokerage accounts. Every dollar should be categorized, and each category should have a withdrawal sequence mapped to your anticipated tax situation in each phase of retirement. This is the single structural difference between the retirees who thrive for 30 years and the ones who quietly unravel by year 12. Third, model your healthcare costs honestly and specifically. Medicare is not free, and it is not flat. IRMA surcharges are real, they are income triggered, and they arrive at thresholds that many disciplined savers will cross. Fidelity Research estimates the average retired couple will spend between $315,000 and $400,000 on out-of-pocket healthcare costs across their retirement. That number is not going down. A health savings strategy, HSA contributions while you're still eligible, supplemental insurance planning, IRMA bracket management, belongs in your retirement architecture before you need it. Fourth, stress test your sequence of returns risk with a specific scenario. Assume the market drops 40% in your first 2 years of retirement. What do you draw from? How long can you avoid selling equities at depressed prices? If you don't have a specific structural answer to that question, a cash reserve, a bond allocation, a Roth account you can pull from without tax consequence, you are gambling with your security in a way that discipline alone cannot protect you from. Fifth, retire with at least 3 income streams, not 1 or 2. Social Security plus portfolio withdrawals is 2. That is not redundancy, that is exposure. A Roth account you can draw from selectively. A part-time income source you actually enjoy and that keeps you engaged. A conservative income-generating asset. Build the kind of structural redundancy that allows you to modulate, to draw from here this year and from there next year, depending on tax conditions, market conditions, and healthcare needs in that specific year. I followed every one of these rules myself. I'm 70 years old. My retirement is secure. Not because I earned more than my clients, many of them far out-earned me over their careers, but because I understood from the beginning that accumulation and distribution are two entirely different disciplines. I never confused them. Robert is doing all right today. We did enough Roth conversion work in 2010 and 2011 to create a meaningful buffer. The IRMA surcharges still sting, but he has options. He gets to take Carol to her appointments without financial panic. He gets to sleep reasonably well. Dennis never fully recovered. He worked until 68. He's 77 now. He gets by. But every time I think about him, I think about October 2007. I think about the 4 months between his retirement date and the beginning of the crash. And I think about the conversation I wish I had forced. The one about sequence risk, about income sources, about structure. The one he told me he hadn't thought he needed. I'm 70 years old. I don't need to be doing this. My retirement is secure. My children are grown. I have no obligation to sit here and tell you things that most financial professionals either don't know or don't say plainly enough. But I keep doing it. Because every person who listens, really listens, and then acts, is one less face I have to add to that mental archive I've been keeping for 35 years. You are the reason I still show up. Don't become a cautionary tale. You have everything you need to be the other kind of story. The kind where the ending is peaceful. The kind where you kept the promises you made. Build the structure, while there's still time to build it.